Hi folks, this is Dr. Rob CYWES. I am the Carb Addiction Doc, and this video is going to return us back to my roots, carb addiction, the addiction side. And when it comes to addiction, whether you use food addiction, carbohydrate addiction, whatever it may be, I prefer carb addiction because that's the drug. There are three components to carb addiction. Three things that we do primarily for endorphin relief. And all three, when done in excess, are harmful to us. Remember, addiction is not predicated by the substance or the behavior. It's predicated by our relationship with it. You smoke a cigar once a month, no harm done. You smoke 20 cigarettes a day, problem. So it's about our relationship with it. And when it comes to carb addiction, there are three elements. I'm going to touch on one of this video is about one of those elements. The first one is the consumption of carbohydrates. Plenty of videos on this channel. We'll keep hammering at that. Reducing your carbohydrate consumption to as close to zero as you possibly can, with the exception of vegetables. The second one is snacking. I just did a video on snacking, primarily from the metabolic side, but snacking is always an emotional event. But the other one that people don't understand, that don't often pay enough attention to, and the internet drives us, especially if we're eating ketogenically, and we're on the improvement side, on the therapeutic side, the internet gets this wrong, and that is binge eating disorder. Overconsumption of food, even though it's episodic and healthy for us. Okay? The quality of the food is not important when it comes to binge eating disorder. And primarily, if you've got persistently elevated blood sugars, or you've got persistently slow weight gain, or your weight's stable or rising, I lost a chunk of weight, now I can't lose any more weight. It's almost always because of binge eating disorder. Even if what you're eating is appropriate, even if you're doing intermittent fasting, binge eating disorder is a dominant emotion management tool that hurts us, and we often are oblivious to it. The way I look at it is, if you look at binge eating disorder, it's very similar to something called cutting. Now, for those of you who don't know what cutting is, it's very common, especially in teenagers, more common in girls and boys, but that is where kids take a piece of paper or something sharp, a safety pin or something like that, and they make little scratches on their skin, usually on the wrists, sometimes on the thighs, sometimes on the chest, sometimes in patterns, and they are purposefully hurting themselves. They're cutting themselves, not as a form of suicide, but what cutting does is it activates the opioid receptors, the naturally opioid or morphine-like or heroin-like receptors in our body, and you get a bizarre buzz. So you're intentionally hurting yourself for that bizarre anxiolytic relief that you feel on the back end. Very dysfunctional, but very common. Think about how if you dig your nails or you bite your lip, those are all forms of anxiolysis that actually are hurting yourself for a degree of pleasure. And sometimes it's okay to bite your lip, but most often it's not necessarily in your best interest. Well, binge eating disorder is exactly the same. That is where you eat so much volume. Oh my God, I shouldn't have eaten this much, I'm stuffed. You're over-distending your stomach. You're making yourself uncomfortable for that bizarre sense of fulfillment on the back end. So you're intentionally hurting yourself for that bizarre sense of fulfillment on the back end. And episodically, if it's your birthday and you overeat on a ribeye steak, it's okay. But if you do it at every meal, if you do it all the time, and our society has indoctrinated ourselves. We've been indoctrinated with binge eating disorder as being optimal. You ask any dietitian out there, they'll tell you, oh, standard diet's 2,000 calories. Well, that's bullshit. That's bullshit. If I eat 2,000 calories a day, I'm gaining weight. But they tell us all the time, and you go out to a restaurant and they predicate an entree based on that amount. It's not just magic how that entree appears. Certainly in the US, the portion sizes are obscenely huge. And we've been indoctrinating our brains to just sit down and eat it, particularly when we're low carbing and it's a steak or it's a salad and there's no carbohydrates in it. Well, I can eat this. Yeah, if you've already arrived at your weight plateau, you can eat a little bit more. But if you're trying to drop, if you're trying to get better from diabetes, binge eating disorder is a dominant retractor from being healthy. And certainly if you have stranded in your weight loss, but I'm doing everything right. You are overeating for what your body needs. And I don't like to use the calories in, calories out concept. In fact, that's a false narrative. But your body is preserving its current status based on what you're eating. And the body, as you become healthier, becomes more efficient, so you need far less to break even. But binge eating disorder is a mental health issue. So how can we stratify against it? Well, what binge eating disorder is where your brain has a predetermined idea about how much you think you need, predicated by emotion, predicated by expectations from portion sizes, and then the brain allows you to put a certain amount of food on your plate, sit down and eat it. That's what happens. So the brain tells the belly how much it's going to get, deal with it. And if it's overconsumed, even if it's the right food, your belly is now struggling to deal with it. The liver is turning excess protein into sugar. Your cells are having to store the stuff. You've got irritable bowel and cramping and misery in your gut. You've got misery everywhere because your body is overwhelmed with how much you're asked to eat. And some people flood very easily. Others are able to absorb it. I'm very good at doing that. Binge eating, I can binge on anything and just turn it to fat. But that's why weight loss is such a big deal for me. Blood sugars are okay. Other people see their blood sugars going up, but I'm not eating carbohydrates. Well, it's protein. So it is harmful no matter what. Guys, when I'm just dragging, when I'm struggling, when I've got a bit of brain fog, when I'm feeling a bit down, or when my blood sugar is a little bit elevated because of adrenaline, because I've exercised and it's not coming down adequately, that is pro-inflammatory. And you know I love my coffee. You know I like my coffee with my caffeine, but there are times when I want a combination of an anti-inflammatory, I want a combination of some caffeine for that stimulant effect, for that mind-cleansing moment that I use throughout the day, and I want to flip myself into deeper ketosis. Well, folks, the guys at HVMN, the Ketone IQ guys, have come up with an incredible product. So think about if ever you use a 5-hour energy, or if you don't like coffee, if you're afraid of coffee, if you are have a religious objection to coffee but not to caffeine, Ketone IQ has come out with a caffeine-enriched ketone product. So not only are you getting the ketone bump to help you, if you use this in the morning, if you use this when you're dragging, obviously not before bedtime, this stimulant, the value of Ketone IQ with some caffeine in it, is no different than having a cup of coffee, except you're also getting the benefit of ketones. So for those of you adding MCT oil, adding butter for that same effect to your coffee, the bullet coffee, this is basically bullet coffee, except it's directly giving you ketones. Try it and see. Now everybody's going to give me pushback. Whoa, 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 whoa. If you're drinking coffee, if you're doing MCT oil, if you're doing butter, you're doing exactly this. So how do you restore this? And understand that what we're trying to do is get your brain to determine when you need to eat, when I'm hungry, and preferably you do that preemptively so that you knew last night when and what you were going to eat. You take the emotional aspect out of the picture when you decide last night what you're going to eat tonight. If you're deciding what you're going to eat tonight in the moment, it's now nighttime, I'm hungry, what am I going to eat? There's a lot of emotional override that goes into that from all three forms of the addiction. So being preemptive is important, but let your brain decide that you need to eat. And if you're at home in the kitchen, prepare the amount of food you think you need. And very often it's predicated by how it comes packaged. So we'll go to Costco and get some ribeye steaks. Well, that's 3 massive ribeye steaks, 3 or 4 in a package. And we can either refreeze them, which we sometimes do, or we make them. And the beauty about carnivore is leftovers are pretty easy to eat and enjoyable. So in the kitchen, I'll make my 3 ribeye steaks, or I'll make my pound or 2 pounds of ground beef, or we don't eat vegetables at home, but in the old days, we used to make a big salad, whatever it was. In the kitchen, you prepare the food. Okay. However, what you then want to do is take that amount of food that you think you need to eat, no matter how skinny or fat you are, and cut that food in a third or in a half. So if we make 3 ribeye steaks, I'll take 1 ribeye steak, cut it into 3 pieces, and each person gets 1. We've got 3 people in our family. Okay, I'll give you another example of this. I can very, very comfortably eat a 4-egg omelet. If I make a 4-egg omelet, I can eat that and I'm full. I'm not even stuffed. I can handle that very easily, but it's way more than I needed. So in the kitchen, I will make a 1-egg omelet, or for my family, I'll make a 3-egg omelet and divide it into 3. You leave the pan on the stove, you leave the eggs out just in case, or in the kitchen, you leave the other 2 ribeye steaks, you cut the one into 3, you put a piece on each person's plate. Now, the way I describe it is very often my plate looks like a darn sparrow pooped on my plate. It's a tiny amount, but that's okay. Get your brain used to seeing that small amount. Pretend you're in a fancy restaurant in Paris where they've given you a kiddie's portion done by an interior decorator. That's normal. Put that small amount of food in front of you. And there are 3 things I want you to make sure there are in your food. Number 1, always make sure there is visible fat. Fat triggers satiety. Fat is your beneficial weapon. So ribeye steak, I can see the fat. But if you're eating a burger, even if it's an 80-20, if you're eating an omelet, if you're eating salmon, whatever you're eating, fatten it up. You can use an egg, you can use cheese, you can use butter, you can use bacon, you can use small fish, sardines, oysters, clams, mussels. You can use olive oil, coconut oil, avocado oil, tallow, ghee, as I said, butter. All of those are condiments that you can add to your food to enrich the fat content. Don't go and suck on a stick of butter halfway through your day. That's nuts. You don't even have to put it significantly unless you're trying to get into deep ketosis in your food. But add it to your food. Make sure you can see visible fat. Number 2 is add salt. Always add salt to your food. Don't be afraid of adding salt to the food. And if you want to, add some form of a micronutrient, whether it's eggs, cheese, small fish, sardines, oysters, clams, mussels, liver. Add that to your food so you're getting your micronutrients in. Then you go down and you sit down and you eat that pathetically small amount of food. Now your brain is starting to eat and it's delivering food, especially the fat, to the gut. There's a series of hormones in the gut that are your satiety hormones, led by GLP-1, but peptide YY, a variety of others, leptin in your fat cells, that take time to trigger. There's 5 of those satiety hormones. And as that satiety gets triggered, it takes time. A signal goes from your belly to your brain that says, dude, you've had enough. But you've got to wait for that to happen, because typically you're going to eat like a Rottweiler having breakfast, 1-egg omelet, it's gone. So find some distraction to do. We've got a cribbage board on our table. We've got a puzzle on our dining room table. We can go do the laundry. We can chat with each other. We can play a game. For 5 or 10 minutes, you want to do something that has 2 purposes. Number 1, it buys metabolic time for your satiety hormones to go back to your brain that says you've had enough. But secondly, you dissipate the emotional tension that comes at the end of the meal. Dessert is always for relaxation. But if you can have fun playing a game of cards or building a puzzle or just chatting with your family or doing the laundry, taking the dog for a walk for a few minutes, that emotional emancipation pushes eating into the biologic nutritional zone. It doesn't have a lot of emotional override. Then when you come back 5 or 10 minutes later, you go back to the kitchen. And if you still want more, by all means, go and eat more. Eat more. And sometimes you do. But most of the time, you look at that and say, I'm full, because you've given yourself that gap and you put it back in the fridge. That's tomorrow's leftovers. That's called eating sequentially. Eating sequentially is the way to combat binge eating disorder. Now, for those of you that go to a restaurant or a buffet line, we'll address those 2, okay? Or you're out with guests, you're out at a friend's house. When we go out as a threesome, my wife, myself, my son, 2 or 3 of us, we don't order our own food. We don't order our own food. First of all, when we're driving to the restaurant, we typically know what the restaurant is going to feed us. We don't need to look at the menu. We can glance at the menu afterwards. But what we do is in the car, on the way to the restaurant, we discuss what we're going to get and what the table's going to look like. Don't put bread on the table. And we select together as a family a single entree. Or you can have a couple of starters, 2 or 3 starters or an entree, not and, or. And everything goes in the middle of the table. We have empty plates. We'll cut that food up and we'll distribute it to each of us. Again, eating sequentially. And you know what's bizarre, folks? Even though it's a single entree, very often we don't even finish that single entree, whereas ordinarily we would each have ordered our own and probably finished it or had to take doggy bags home. If you do finish it and people are still hungry, you can always order more. The restaurant's not going to run out of food while you're sitting there. But if you've over-ordered, you're going to overeat. Binge eating disorder. Oh, why did I not lose weight? But let go of the 2,000 calories a day. A lot of my patients after bariatric surgery are around the 400 to 800 calories a day, and they're losing weight. If they go to 1,200 calories a day, they're breaking even. So don't play the calorie game. Play the eating sequentially to satiety game. And most restaurants are going to have some bacon. They're going to have some butter. Fatten up the food if it's not fat. Or order the prime rib or whatever it may be with a big chunk of fat on it. If you're hungry, you can always eat more. But most of the time, you'll find that beyond that little entree, you don't need more. If you're going to a place where they have a buffet and you're going with somebody that you trust, never, ever, ever fix your own plate. I call it the crossover. I've learned all of this from bitter lesson. But my wife gets me my food and I get her food. And in that way, we are more likely to select food that is appropriate for us to eat in an appropriate volume, but we don't become a victim of the crystal meth at the back end of that buffet line, where there's always the desserts and everything else. My wife will fix a better plate of food for me than I will ever fix for myself, and I'll do the same for her. And in that way, you avoid the temptation in the moment. Eat sequentially to the point where your belly tells your brain how much it needed rather than your belly telling your brain how much it's going to get. And both from a weight maintenance, weight loss perspective, metabolic health perspective, you are going to be as healthy as you can be. Do not underestimate the emotional override potential of binge eating disorder, even if you think you don't. If I've made you think, if I've helped you to resume being stranded in your weight loss, dropping that down, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. It helps us. It costs you nothing. It helps us to keep this channel flowing. If you like the content, throw a buck to our Patreon or our PayPal account. It's in the show notes. And if you really want to consult on whether or not this is an issue, we can calculate this on your blood work. We can calculate this by feedback. SHERYL, our dietitian, who's very, very helpful, not just designing healthier diets, but also looking at caloric consumption. Didn't say that word. But all of us, we have resources we can help you. Set up a visit, 561-517-0642, to see myself, to see SHERYL, our dietitian. She can help to design certain plans for you.